Welcome to another edition of the Dakotan's Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. You can go to mydakotan.com, click on Election Central, where you will find other interviews just like the one you are about to watch. I did such a good job rolling that out, but there's something I forgot to ask you before I start going, and so we're going to have to reshoot that. How do you say your last name?
It's pronounced Danduran.
Danduran. Okay, just like it reads, but I don't want to mess it up. So
No, sure, no worries.
welcome to another edition of the Dakotan's Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. I'm Jonathan Starr. You can go to mydakotan.com, click on Election Central, and there you'll find a list of candidates and other interviews just like the one you're about to watch. Today, we are thankful to have Larry Danduran joining us for this podcast, this episode. Thank you for joining us today, Larry.
You're welcome, Jonathan. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you.
Absolutely. So as we jump into this, tell us a little bit about who Larry is. Sometimes I ask it this way: if we met each other in high school, we're both 17 years old. Who am I going to meet?
Well, I moved back from Columbus, Ohio in 1992.
Okay.
I've been a business owner. Actually, my ex-wife and I owned a Chevrolet dealership, which unfortunately we had to close in 2009. Thought that I needed to leave North Dakota, bounced around the country a little bit. Ultimately ended up back in New Rockford. North Dakota is really where I belong. Both my parents are from the state. My mother is particularly from the Esmond area, and so this is kind of the stomping grounds for me. And I couldn't think of a better place to live, honestly. I'm back in the car business. I work for
Okay.
Bassett Motor Group, and I manage a Chevrolet store here in Carrington.
Is North Dakota one of the best kept secrets in the United States?
It is. I just hope we don't keep it a secret too long because it's a great place, and I would love to see more conservative, like-minded individuals join us up here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, interesting background. What in that background kind of sparked your interest in running for a House seat in District 14?
Well, I think it was kind of an alignment of multiple issues. I'm at a point in my life where my kids are growing, and I have the time, and I feel like I still have the energy to make a difference. And
Right.
I guess I got involved with the District 14 Republican Party a few years ago, and during our last reorganization meeting, all three legislators were there, and there were some issues in the last legislative session that really sparked some concerns, and one of which was House Bill 1082 regarding ushering in a central bank digital currency. And during that meeting, all three of our legislators had acknowledged that they had made a mistake on their vote. And of course, the question came from, the constituents are there. Well, what are you going to do about it? And they tried to make a last minute effort to roll it back, but it already had gone to Governor Burgum's desk. But the interesting question came out of the group was whether they had read the bill or not. And
Okay.
all three of them admitted they had not read the bill. And this
Wow.
was kind of a light bulb for me. I mean, this is a serious issue. Ushering in a digital currency like this, and to have not read the bill and totally to rely on committee recommendation, sent a loud message to me that that they have become complacent,
Right.
and we can't afford this. I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to be an easy process to go through 900 bills, and if we have too many, we just got to slow things down. We gotta give our representatives the opportunity to do their job. So
Yeah.
that
It's
was really the spark for me.
which creates really interesting discussion. Obviously, we've talked a lot about term limits and how that's going to affect legislatures, um, limiting their ability to run, and it's going to create a lot more turnover, which maybe that's a good thing. But some of the feedback is, do we need to go to annual uh, legislative sessions? which would decrease the amount of bills that would be seen in potentially decrease the amount of bills that would be seen in one of the legislative sessions. And it would give opportunity to what you're talking about there, where perhaps not every bill is being read. Do you think something like that would be a good solution for the future of North Dakota politics?
I, I, I think that's one option to certainly consider. Um, the other option is that that we should consider making sure all bills come out of the legislative representatives and not from agencies.
Okay.
Um, there's I can't even fathom, honestly. I tried to keep up this last session, but 900 bills. I mean,
Right.
given the opportunity, I'm not looking to add any more bills. Honestly, I think that we have a lot of bills that need to be rolled back, and we can go into that if you'd like. But it's I think we've got enough laws. I'd like to see smaller government, less infringement, truthfully, on our
Yeah.
liberties.
So for the viewers watching, 900 bills, you have 80 days of that the legislature is in session. Sorry, stumbling over my words there. You have 80 days that the legislature is in session. You have 900 bills to go through. That'd be a lot of bills, over 10 a day, that you'd have to be covering if you're going to read them all. A lot of reading material there, and you guys don't have assistants, so this is stuff that you guys are doing by yourself. Obviously, there's committees and stuff like that work through some of these bills. Um, let's go ahead and talk about some of your main issues that you are running on, in your campaign.
Well, one that's really strikes a chord with me is the policies in that we have implemented and are living under regarding the CO2 villainization.
All right.
Um, this is a big mistake. We've turned CO2 into people into thinking CO2 is pollution,
Right.
and that's really unfortunate. Don't get me wrong. I don't endorse pollution by any means, but we do not have too much CO2. I feel very strongly about that. If you dive into some alternative discussions regarding other scientists in that, and they'll make it clear that CO2 is really not the villain regarding climate and climate change as much as the reality is the sun. But you look at the policies that we've implemented from alternative energy sources, solar panels, and then it's wind generators, and then the big push for EV automobiles. And now we're going to push CO2 into the ground.
Right.
Um, it's like I said, as you dive deeper into the subject, you realize that we need not less CO2. We could truly benefit from more CO2 in our environment.
Right. So this is a topic that has come up a couple of times in our podcast, but honestly, we haven't talked about it in depth with any of the candidates that we have had podcasts with. So let's dive into it a little bit here. Um, First off, kind of what's being addressed is the carbon pipeline, the CO2 pipeline, that is wanting to be it's being done by the Summit Group, I believe, that would be running all the way up through the Midwest and ending at least on the northern point in Bismarck, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so what's kind of the goal of that pipeline? Can you explain that?
Well, I think the goal is select individuals are going to make a lot of money. Um,
Okay.
you you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, literally codified the decision by the state legislators to um, to define carbon capture pipelines the same as we do as public utilities.
Wow.
That has opened the door for eminent domain and land seizure.
Right.
Um, with that bill, they're paying for sequestration of $80+ a ton. This is taxpayer money. I don't know how the sequestration is going to benefit anybody in the state other than those that are invested in that program.
Right.
In fact, one of the kind of anomalies that happened for us in North Dakota this year is that producers in our area, and particularly Eddy County that I know personally, had a tremendous corn crop. Many of them had much better crops than they ever expected. And my question to them is, did we have the rains? And most all of them will tell you that we really didn't have the moisture that they would expect. But we hear the same cliche we've heard for years. They must have been timely. But the reality is that we experienced weeks and weeks of Canadian fire smoke discharge rolling over the top of us. And
Okay.
diving into CO2, you quickly realize that CO2 is a heavier molecule than most of the atmosphere. So that CO2 that's released out of these fires, which is quite significant, ended up pretty much at ground level for us.
Wow.
The interesting thing about CO2 and working and looking into what greenhouses are doing, I mean, they pump CO2, commercial greenhouses, into their greenhouses, is that as CO2 levels go up, the moisture demand on plants goes down.
Okay.
So this is purely a hypothesis, but if you look at the reality of what's happened in our area, it's clear to me that CO2 played a positive role in the ag production in our area.
Wow. That's incredible insight. And then when you talk about the dangers of what they're trying to do, and there could be value points to it, which we're not spending a lot of time talking about, but some of the dangers of it is when you're putting it underground. There's reports of the ability for that to, if it gets exposed, that it could make it where you can't drive your cars and stuff like that. Can you talk to a little bit about those dangers?
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, they're looking at pumping this CO2 into the ground at a psi of around 4,000 psi, which, if anybody has an air compressor at home or in our shop here at the dealership, I mean, we run about 120 pounds.
Yeah.
So that kind of puts it in perspective how much pressure we're talking about. From what I understand, if a leak does occur, the pipe literally will rip apart just by the massive flow of pressure coming through the whatever
Wow.
hole is generated. And being that CO2 is a heavier molecule than the atmosphere around it, it literally will displace all the other gases in the area. So if you happen to be in the area, then it does become toxic just by the massive concentrations. But we're living in an environment now. The average CO2 concentration is around 400 parts per million. And I think most people don't realize that that number represents less than one half of 1% of our atmosphere.
Wow.
It's a trace element.
Yeah.
And so the other key thing to I think keep in mind is we just don't know the geological ramifications of pushing this into the ground. I
Right.
mean, we're playing Russian roulette, and as far as I'm concerned, on what we're looking at years down the road.
Absolutely. And so we've talked about this in depth, but one more part to it is if they, you mentioned, but we kind of moved past, is if they turn into a public works deal, then there's the opportunity for eminent domain where property can be taken from the landowners. And that's also a scary thing, especially when you're talking about individual liberties and just people being able to own what they have. Is that a concern that you have as well?
Absolutely. In fact, they already did this. I believe it was done during the '66 legislative session, is when they put it in the same definition as public utilities. And in fact, the last session, there were a group that tried to get it reversed and taken out of. And again, our legislative group decided to not change the definition. So they already have the ability to do this by eminent domain, and with the Inflation Reduction Act, pretty much codified the whole program.
It's incredible. So that's definitely something that you're going to be concerned about if elected to the legislature in North Dakota. What is another main issue that you are campaigning on?
Well, I think that we could go into a few different things. We could talk about the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. Um, I've been, you know, I've been here in the state since '92 as a permanent resident, and I look at, just a few miles from my house is the Garrison Diversion, and I've looked what that's done and what it hasn't done, and then I
Mm.
look at the McCluskey Canal and that project, and now we're spending, a projected $1.1 billion again to push water from the western part of our state over the divide to the eastern part of our state. And it seems to me every spring we're trying to figure out how to get water out of the valley.
Yeah,
Um, I just think we need to start prioritizing infrastructure projects within our state, and in particularly the district that I'm looking to represent.
absolutely. Something that you mentioned, or a question I have for you, I guess, not that you mentioned, but a question that I have for you, is how do you feel about the size of government in North Dakota? Is this, I mean, you've already mentioned the 900 bills. Should we keep growing government, or how do you feel about
Absolutely not. I our chairman had mentioned, and I haven't fact checked this, but I assume that he's accurate, that um, our state um, our state budget is the highest in the country per capita. And even if it's not, if it's close, that should be of great concern. We claim to be a conservative state with a majority of Republicans, and to have a record like this is of great concern. We need to really focus on how we can roll back uh, our government. I'm not looking to kick the legs out of everything, but I mean we got to start prioritizing our expenditures.
Yeah. So about that, and we've I've talked about this before. Like, where does that rollbacks actually come back? What division? I understand that you can't probably say the exact programs that you would be looking to get rolled back, but what part of society that the government's supporting would you see having some rollback in?
Well, I think we could, social services is a huge expense within our state. And I think there's some, without getting into specifics, think there's some things that we can do to save the state a lot of money and still provide the services that we need. Without going down the rabbit hole, I've got some ideas regarding healthcare in our state, such as a prepaid primary health care. This is being done in some parts of the country, and it saves a tremendous amount of money. And if we were to roll some ideas like that into social services, I think it could potentially save billions of dollars, truthfully.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very insightful there. Um, let's go ahead and switch gears a little bit. And I want to talk about your district. Obviously, you guys have, or you have received the endorsement in your district, which is very cool. But there's this trend that's going on this year where there's a lot of incumbents that are not prioritizing the endorsement from their district and are just running in the June primary. I believe that's happening in your district as well. Do you feel like this is a good trend for the party? Obviously, you're fighting it at the ground level.
Yeah, I can't really speak for the other districts and what they've experienced. I don't like the idea that our current legislators will not address the constituents that are showing up for these conventions. In our case, in District 14, um, all three of the legislators were given the agenda of the meeting ahead of time. So they knew that they were on the agenda to speak, and we all assumed that they were seeking the endorsement. Um, what had happened is they had showed up to a group of probably close to 200 people in Steele. And I can't speak on their behalf, but it appears to me that they were a little concerned with who showed up in the sense that they didn't probably know a lot of these people. And they approached our district chair and asked to be taken off the agenda and said that they were not going to seek the endorsement, that they were going to be running, but they were going to get the signatures they needed to get on the ballot. I was a little distraught. I was truthfully looking forward to hearing them and
Right.
their message, and allowing them, the opportunity to share what they've done. They've had almost 30 years of service, all three of them, and it was a good time to reflect on what they've done for our district, which they obviously passed on the opportunity. But the bizarre part about this, when asked, well, there was going to be ballots handed out, and because there was nobody else running in opposition to us challengers, um, Bill Coons, our chair, asked that everybody in support of the challengers please stand up, and overwhelming majority of the room did,
Yeah.
including the three legislators. Now,
Wow.
I don't know if they were paying attention like they do the way they vote on bills or what, but they stood up to endorse us. This
Yeah.
was so bizarre.
Right.
And of course, asked everybody to sit down. And then again, Bill asked those opposed, please stand up. Not one person in the building stood up.
Wow.
So I just don't know. I don't know where their heads are at. And
Yep.
you mentioned term limits. This is ties right into term limits.
Yep.
It's easy for me to say as a challenger, just getting into the, process, but I foresee a future where as legislators begin to term out, that they would begin mentoring new leadership and working with young Republicans and so forth to get them ready to participate in the process.
Right.
This is not what's happening. It appears that many of these legislators just cannot let go.
Wow.
And it's a little concerning on what the motive is, to be honest. I don't understand. Is not 28 years enough? I don't
Right.
get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that should be a concern with term limits, about the experience and the leadership and that mentorship that should be happening. And I would venture to say, based off some of the interviews we have, in some case it is, in some cases it is, but it is concerning, because it should be happening right now in a healthy house, in a healthy, and a healthy legislator. It should be happening. Um, You mentioned that there was this disconnect that's almost happened, and we've heard that before from the people of North Dakota. How do you plan once you get into, if you're elected, how do you plan to make sure that your constituents feel connected to Bismarck while you're down there making decisions for them?
Well, I think it boils down to communication. And we have so many ways to communicate, whether it's Facebook or however. Um, there's no reason that, we as legislators shouldn't be reaching out to the constituents on a regular basis, and especially during session when all these bills are coming through to get input. And I'm not saying that they have totally ignored us, but it's not been easy, to really communicate. I've tried a few times, and it seems like by the time that the word gets out that they're looking for input, it's too late. That they've already received, recommendations by the committees and have already laid out their vote. But it's accountability. I think that one of the things that for myself, I'm going to look to stay very active with the county commissioners and the needs of the counties, and obviously they have their hands into local issues and things of concern, and this should be there should be a direct conduit right there with all the county commissioners, and obviously township uh, leaders too need to be listened to. These are the people that are dealing with the infrastructure issues and so forth.
Absolutely. We didn't do a rapid fire question this time, okay? So I'm sorry if you watched some of our interviews, we do some rapid fire questions. We didn't do it this time. But I do have a different question for you that we've asked a couple times, and I think it's an interesting deal. We've heard that you're for smaller government. We've heard some of the things that you are for. And from that, you can see how you would represent the Republican Party. But if someone asked Larry straight up, hey, Larry, what makes you a Republican? What's your response to that? Why do you identify as a Republican?
Well, a lot of or I'd say almost all of the Republican platform I'm in line with.
Yeah,
Right to life is important to me. Um, Property rights are very much important to me, and I think that limited government is fundamental. Um, it really boils down to um, just looking at the platform and doing some soul searching. Is this where you align? I mean, are you trying to represent everybody in your district, or are you going to stay true to the platform? And obviously, I can't represent everybody. There's a lot of liberals in our district, not a majority by any means, but I'm sensitive to their concerns in that. But I can guarantee you, I'm going to hold solid to the Republican principles and conservative principles, and particularly the federal and state constitution.
absolutely. Obviously, that June 11 primary is going to be a pretty big. What do you tell the person that asks what makes you qualified to run, or why should I vote for Larry?
Well, I don't want to toot my horn too much. I have served on several different boards. I've been elected as a city commissioner in New Rockford. I've served on the park board, elected position, parish council, um, and I've got a little experience with dealing with government. My wife is a county commissioner, so I get to share those kind of issues
Yeah,
with her on a county level. I and I'm at a point in my life, my kids are growing. I can devote the time and energy to, to put in the effort to do the job.
absolutely. Well, really appreciate you coming on today. How can somebody that would be interested in contacting you or supporting you find you?
Well, we have a website, District 14 team.com,
Okay,
and then I can give you my number. Anybody can call me at any time. More than welcome to visit. Is 701, of course, 710 0000. Make it easy.
that's easy enough. There you go. Well, again, thank you for coming on to the Dakotans Election Central today, Larry.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This has been another episode of the Dakotans Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. I'm Jonathan Starr. Be sure to go to mydakotan.com, click Election Central, and there you'll find a database of candidates. And you'll also be able to see other interviews just like the one you watched. It's a great resource for you as you make decisions in your uh, voting process this year. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, like and subscribe on YouTube, become part of the Dakotan community. We're also now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, the whole works. We're here for you wherever however your consuming pleasure is. So thank you again for watching this episode. Thank you and have a great day.